You feuded with the Rock and Roll Express quite a bit there. Could you share some memories of working with them?
Yes, definitely. Um, when we were in Mid-South wrestling with Bill Watts, that's when I first met the Rock and Roll Express. And there were a couple of young guys in the business. You know, they were in Memphis and the Tennessee territory and all that, and these guys could work. But they were smaller guys. They were young guys where all the girls loved these guys. And when I became Krusher Khrushchev down there, Bill Watts was smart enough to say, "Hey, Nikolai and Krusher Khrushchev, I want you guys to work with the Rock and Roll Express." And back then, we both kind of had the big man complex. It's like, how can you work with these little guys when we're this big and we're not going to fly around for them? And, that was the attitude you kind of had, but it was the wrong attitude. Bill Watts taught us that you act like the big guys, but when it's time for the smaller guys to make that comeback, you fly for them. He always taught me, put these guys over big time, because then that makes you a better heel. I mean, he had the philosophy. So we had matches with the Rock and Roll Express that were just incredible, and it got us over even bigger and got them over bigger. And then they ended up working with the Midnight Express, and now all of a sudden the Rock and Roll Express were over so big it was easier for the Midnight Express. I mean, it all balloons, and what a territory that was. So anyways, back to the Rock and Roll Express in Mid-South. So Ivan and I were doing tag matches with everybody, and we were establishing ourselves as a really good tag team. And we ended up winning the titles there, and they had the U.S. titles, and then they had the world titles. So I can't remember which one it was, but we had the titles, and we were going around, and I remember Dusty pulled me aside and Ivan, and he said, "Hey, I want you guys to have a title match with somebody, and I want you to have some unbelievable matches. Who would be the guys that you want to work with?" And I told Ivan about the matches that we had with the Rock and Roll Express, and Ivan knew the Rock and Roll, but didn't know him. He knew him but didn't know him. And I told Dusty, I said, "Dusty, I think we should have matches with the Rock and Roll Express, and I think they should take the titles from us." And he looked at me and he goes, "Oh, you want to lose the titles?" And I said, "Well, I think we need to lose the titles, and we need to win them back." But I said, they're new in the territory, and I don't know exactly if it went this way, but it's kind of what I'm remembering. We ended up working matches with the Rock and Roll Express all over the territory. We had our Broadways with them. So it was me and Ivan against the Rock and Roll Express. We'd have, in every town, we'd wrestle them. It was an hour match, and then it was a draw. And then we'd have matches where right before the draw, we'd cheat and win. And then there'd be riots. And I mean, we'd have a hard time getting out of the building. And I remember one night we were in Washington, D.C., and it was a sellout crowd. And we were against the Rock and Roll Express. And it was like a 45-minute match. And it ended up being where the Rock and Roll Express had a big comeback on us, and they were going to beat us. And they were going to beat me, and Ivan somehow came with a gimmick and knocked him out, and we won the match and walked out with the titles. And the whole crowd is one of those deals again. They were ready to kill us. And we were walking out of the ring, and the lights were shining right on us. And it was one of those places where they had, an upper deck, and it was probably 25, 30,000 people there. It was a big night. And we're walking out, and you couldn't hardly see, and we were exhausted, tired. And Ivan was in front of me, so I was right behind him, and I'm looking up in the lights, and I saw something coming out of the balcony, and it was heading right towards Ivan. I jumped in front of Ivan, pushed him aside, and it hit me square in the head. And man, I thought it was like a bullet that hit me. I mean, it hit, and I started getting kind of dizzy, and I was ready to go down, and blood coming out of my head immediately. And Ivan grabs me and goes, "Oh, Krush," he says, "you saved my life," you know. And anyways, he reaches down, and he picks it up, and we get in the dressing room, and I mean, I'm dizzy, and I'm thinking to myself, "Oh my God, what did I get hit with?" He pulls it out, and it's a hot dog, and it had a giant bolt in it. So the hot dog came, and you know how heavy a bolt was. That's what hit me in the head. And if the bolt would have hit me, it probably would have, you know, I don't know what I would have done, but it ended up being I got probably 5, 6 stitches and had a freaking lump in my head. But anyways, what ended up happening was, so we had these matches everywhere, and there was so much heat with these guys. We had a match in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and it was an hour-long match, but right before the hour, the Rock and Roll Express beat us. And it was a sellout crowd, and it wasn't a very big building. It probably held, you know, 6,000 people or whatever, but it was jam-packed. And when we lost the titles, the air came out of, I mean, it was so unbelievable. The cheer was so loud. Ivan and I were laying on the mat. I couldn't even breathe. It was like they took the air out of the room, and the Rock and Roll Express won these titles. And I'm looking at Ivan, I'm going, "Ivan, I have never, ever heard a crowd like this before in my life." And even to this day, you know, winning the titles in the WWE or the WWF, whatever, all the matches I've ever had, I never, ever had a pop like that before in my life that I've ever heard. And I crawled over to Ivan in the ring, and we were just laying there going, "Holy shit, what a match that was." And the whole dressing room bailed out and came up to the Rock and Roll Express and were congratulating them. It was like the biggest angle, bigger angle than I've ever been in or anything, and it was phenomenal. And we got out of the ring, and I said to Ivan, I go, "Ivan, was that a hell of a match?" And we both said, "Jesus, thank you." And I thanked him. And you know, after they had their, you know, interview out in front of the crowd and with all the guys, and interview in the dressing room with all the baby faces and everything, and you know, we were in our dressing room, they were in their dressing room, and the whole place emptied out, and we got together with them, and they thanked us, and it was like, you know, that was the greatest moment in my life for wrestling at that time. And I don't even remember where we were at. Oh, it's the Rock and Roll Express. So, anyways, these guys were phenomenal. They would do anything you wanted to do, and you could count on them when it was time for them to make their comeback. You better be in shape because you were going to fly. And it was so fun because normally as a heel, you're calling the whole match and doing everything. With those guys, you could let them call it, and they called the match just like you would have called, but even wanted you to even get more heat on them. So, you know, in fact, the last match that I had after my new knee, you know, being at the age I am now, was the Rock and Roll Express. We were in Raleigh, North Carolina. So Ricky and Robert, I love those guys. Great guys.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Support us on patreon.com for $1.99 a month to watch our full shoot interviews ad-free and help our channel grow. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.